Who are the police? The police are a necessary and virtuous group of people whose daily duties seek to serve us and protect us from harm. They uphold the law, keep the peace, and protect our rights. They are selfless, honest, and moral people whose boundless integrity maintains their equally high standards. They make great personal sacrifices in the service of the public good. This public good is always at the forefront of their minds, and when the police go about their daily duties, they do so with the utmost respect and reverence for the public who finance them. This was an important lesson that was taught to me in my formative years and beyond. It was taught by family, friends, neighbours, peers, teachers, community leaders, elders, the media, and society in general, the collective. It was also taught by the very same people who are the subject of this article, i.e. the police. However, that is all bullshit. I'm not an idiot, so I don't subscribe to that viewpoint. This lesson was and is taught by the collective to help foster the good of the collective, by sacrificing the freedom and autonomy of the individual through obeying the laws that the police enforce. The reason it is taught in the formative years, said to be up to age 8, is that these are the years during which anything learned has a significant impact on forming a person, hence the name formative. The formative years occur long before intellectual maturity. This means if people are taught and internalise ideas in their formative years, they are less likely to be critically analysed with such intellectual rigour when they do reach intellectual maturity, at least not to the same standard as a newly acquired idea would be analysed if it is acquired when someone has already reached intellectual maturity. This ultimately means that people are more likely to believe bullshit they are taught when they are young than if they are taught it when they are older. This is the reason why so many groups target children: police, government, religion, LGBT, the left, etc. My view of the police, unlike the one I have just articulated, which is indoctrinated into the herd and which they believe unquestioningly, is different. It is informed by years of experience of the police and how they operate. As people, they're easy to read because they're not very bright and they're not self-aware. My experience includes different situations and contexts, such as me being a victim of crime, a witness to crime, complainant of crime, the accused, defendant, appellant, as a casual observer, and witness to a non-stop succession of police scandals. The police are a bunch of unintelligent, hired, black-clad bullies. They are thuggish policy enforcers of the state, akin to street jobs but more organised. They enforce an ever-expanding set of rules created by the state designed to control the people. The police came from the herd and have the same uncritically endorsed view of themselves and the supposed function they carry out. Not being thinkers, they blindly follow orders which aren't in the public good. Think Nazi Germany, obviously. They have a monopoly on violence, that is, as a state agent, and cannot comprehend how any actions they carry out in the course of their work can be deemed as bad, wrong, or a mistake. They cannot conceptualise that any violence levelled at them as a result of their morally unjustified behaviours could be deemed as acceptable. This is because, being unintelligent, it naturally follows that they do not think. The majority now recruited are yes men. Therefore, they have a morality framework imposed upon them that they accept without question. This morality framework is the law, criminal law, created by the state. Although morality is subjective, at least to a large extent, it does not map directly onto the concept of legality and illegality. Examples of things which are deemed illegal but are actually not immoral, many of which will be context dependent, are too obvious to mention. The criminal law that the police enforce is intended as an objective framework of right and wrong that applies to everybody, at least in theory. Corrupt politicians, by definition all of them, and people who operate in the legal system, the police included, are examples of people who, due to their position, can subvert the criminal laws with perceived impunity and for their own benefit. These are the laws that they impose on others in the most dishonest and hypocritical way. Many government agencies perform policing and regulatory roles in many areas, but are not called the police. For the purposes of this video, I will be mainly talking about the agents called the police. This is because even though many of the ideas I will talk about are prevalent in all of these agencies, they are particularly conspicuous in the police for reasons I will elaborate on. Briefly though, the other agencies generally require more specific technical knowledge, training and intelligence which the police don't have. Another small point before I start, the police can't even get the meaning of the word intelligence right. Intelligence is an ability, a computational process. The police erroneously use that word to represent the concept of information. For example, when a snitch relays information to the police about someone growing a cannabis farm. Right. Who will join the police and what kind of people are in the police? Good question, or bad question maybe. Unintelligent fascists who need a path to follow. No qualifications are needed to join the police, at least not in the place people call the UK. A few police organisations are attempting to change this with graduate entry schemes and degree programmes for new starters. However, currently that is the minority. Now, I'm not saying people without a degree are unintelligent, far from it. Some of the so-called educated people I've seen aren't what you call bright. And for whatever reason, some people aren't educated to their intelligence level and don't have formal qualifications, but are still reasonably competent. But I think we can see a general negative correlation between the lower socio-economic strata in society, education level, intelligence, i.e. when one is lower, the others are. Right, that is particularly the case in dinosaurs, the long-serving rank-and-file police who have not been promoted and who have evaded professionalisation. Not a great deal of intelligence is required to be in the police. They aren't creative, so tend to be more conscientious in following their procedures and diktats. That's obviously tempered by their laziness. Therefore, a structured hierarchical organisation like the police appeals to them. This is because to do well in the police, all you have to do is turn up where and when you get told to, do what you get told to, and follow all the laid down rules and procedures. It is so simple because all the rules they enforce can be referred to in black and white, and every aspect of their procedures are laid out, like the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, PACE for example. The police are so thick though, they regularly get this wrong. To illustrate better what I mean, I'll make comparisons between a career path in a hierarchical organisation like the police, monkey see, monkey do, and crystallised intelligence, and an intelligent creative person, perhaps an entrepreneur, and fluid intelligence. Crystallised intelligence can be said to be working within the parameters of a pre-existing system where the knowledge and procedures within it and the framework of that system act as an aid to competent functioning within the system. Fluid intelligence, however, is the intrinsic computational ability of a mind to operate dynamically and in new territory. It should be clear, as I have mentioned, which kind of intelligence refers to which kind of person and why. This makes it all the more distasteful, the idea of conceited police behaving in ways commensurate with and indicative of upstanding, competent and accomplished members of the community with the usual financial trappings to match. How well would a police person have done in life by making their own path? In two ways that appear to be valued by the collective, financial and status achievement, not very. Police people, however, appear so pleased with themselves by simplistically following a path that facilitates their acquisition of financial and social status. For them, though, it is only possible with statism. The hierarchical organisation of the police appeals to the people within policing organisations for other reasons. It allows them to behave in ways which are congruent with their fascist tendencies. Some of the ways they do this are: number one, nationalism. The police are not employed, they are warranted and serve their supreme leader, the monarch. This is the case in the UK. They use patriotic mottos, symbols and songs, e.g. God Save the Queen, the phrase and the national anthem. Rank markings, police and national insignia, flags on buildings and uniforms. Number 2. Disdain for recognition of human rights. A basic awareness of current and past affairs exemplifies this point. On micro to macro scales, the police are always seeking to disregard people's rights, whether it is through restricting or attempting to restrict protests, for example, denying legal provisions to detainees, or actively committing harm against them or the general public. When people who have been accosted by the police quote the law or their rights to the police in an attempt to stop their ill treatment by the police make sarcastic remarks such as, "Where did you get your law degree from?" implying that it is wrong to be aware of the law and associate procedures, and conveying their unhappiness and disbelief that the people they are meant to serve might know more than them and or have the impudence to question them. This is where their big, ugly egos come out. More on that later. Number 3. Prejudiced behaviour. The Stephen Lawrence case, institutionalised racism, the Sarah Everard vigil, sexist behaviour by the police using extreme violence against vigil attendees, as well as the actual abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard by a disgusting member of the police who actually used his position as police to gain her trust and to aid in the commission of his crimes. Rape, misconduct and general corruption. The YouTube channel Police Abusing Powers documents many examples of this. The continued trend of a minority of whistleblowers revealing disgusting sexist and racist language and behaviour of police in general. One case involved police committing these acts whilst guarding murder scenes with bodies still present and within closed social media messaging groups. These have led to numerous police misconduct hearings and criminal investigations. However, these are only the ones the public get to hear about. How many cover-ups have there been? The police investigate the police. Some of the WhatsApp messaging groups had over 100 police in them. Are the police really going to investigate and potentially sack 100 people and decimate their workforce? Or are they going to brush these issues under the carpet where possible? Are the ones who are disciplined bad apples, or are they representative of the rest? Shortly before I posted this video, Dick, the former chief of the Metropolitan Police, resigned over all the scandals involving police in the Met. This was due to pressure from the London Mayor Sadiq Khan. The Police Federation then stated they have no confidence in Sadiq Khan, but who gives a fuck what they think? They are a scummy police organisation who look after bent police and stick two fingers up to the public. Number 4. Obsession with national security. This one is perhaps more prevalent in places like the capital London, etc. The police love to trample people's rights, particularly tourists, photographers and the new wave of so-called auditors. They try to control people's behaviours and movements, quoting the national terror threat level completely out of context and often wrong. It's just been lowered, by the way. They try to use terrorism legislation, which is designed to protect national security, against a man and a camera, even often quoting repealed sections of the law or sections that require higher authorisation, which at the time of their intended use they do not have. Number 5. Protection of corporate power. Biased policing in the interests of big business whilst disadvantaging ordinary people. Curtailment of protests. A more favourable response to concerns of corporations than those of Joe Public. The disparity between the treatment of low-level crime and high-level or white-collar and corporate crime. Again, more on this later. Number 6. Obsession with crime and punishment. This one obviously speaks for itself. Never trust the police. You cannot have an honest conversation with them, whether they are at work in uniform or not. They are always looking at ways to stitch people up, often dishonestly, and will misquote words completely out of context and in a selective way. When making representations to their victims, the police will do so in an intellectually dishonest way to facilitate this. Anything and everything is twisted round to right and wrong, legal and illegal. Coronavirus laws must have been an absolute dream for many of them, almost like a fascist's charter. Even though the police are lazy and don't like fighting real crime, especially when danger is involved, they somehow find the time to enforce these laws against innocent members of the public in social gatherings who aren't causing harm to anybody. For example, two people sitting in a park far away from anybody else. It shows that they can't think for themselves and will enforce anything they are told. Right, that is 6 out of the 14 fascist criteria. I don't want to make this too long, but 3 F-scale characteristics spring to mind also. Number 1, deference to authority speaks for itself. A hierarchical organisation which is supposedly disciplined, where orders filter down and you must obey. Members of the public must also obey police without question, at least in the minds of the police anyway. A tactic that the police often use when a member of the public questions the veracity of claims made by the police, actions performed by the police, or information requested by the police is to say things like, "I'm not going to argue about it," or similar. This has the effect of conveying that the police think what the police say is absolute and cannot be discussed or countered, and that the public should blindly follow. This is also the case when their requests and demands are not backed up by law. The police think that someone who is not in their dominance hierarchy and not wearing their stupid uniform can't be right. Again, denying the rights of the people and showing their anti-intellectualism. Number 2, contempt for people who are different from them. This one is exemplified by their prejudiced behaviour, see earlier. Number 3, superstitious beliefs. Yes. One definition of this is an irrational belief that an object, action or circumstance not logically related to a course of events influences its outcome. This is predictable really, given their low intelligence, anti-intellectualism and lack of critical thinking. Maybe it explains why they stitch people up. A general error in thinking is to confuse correlation with causation. Obviously the police often do this, not just because they are police, just because they're not really bright as well. Right. Further to that, misuse, destruction, tampering, or the total fabrication of evidence to unduly influence criminal proceedings. 2 fascinating books dealing with superstition and the state are, number 1, The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose, which I'll place a link to a free PDF for in the description, and The Nazis and the Occult, which I'll also place a link to. Right, I'll move on in slightly more detail about how the police stitch people up. The scientific method of investigation is the only way to investigate and gain knowledge, understanding, and to work things out. This, of course, entails objective and impartial reasoning and the state of being informed. A critical analysis is made with the removal of biases, particularly confirmation bias. Evidence is gathered and analysed, then a conclusion is made based on the evidence, obviously with caveats. Although I use the word scientific, this word refers to the method more so than the topic. Educated people know this, unlike the police. However, basic intelligence gives rise to this method. Again, that disqualifies the police. The scientific method is required for everything, whether it's minor offences such as the investigation of theft of a loaf of bread, or major ones like the genocide of millions. The same standards of impartiality and objectivity need to be applied to both. This method is antithetical, however, to the way the police work. The police will take a complaint or form an idea themselves and then collect a small amount of evidence. They are already unconsciously subject to the phenomenon of believing to be right whoever gets their story in first, no matter how unlikely it might seem. A high-profile example of this is the police investigation into the late Leon Britton, the former UK Home Secretary. Not having a wider awareness of the bigger picture or their own biases, The police then interpret a complaint, supported by minimal and one-sided evidence, through the lens of their fascist worldview and paint the worst picture possible of the alleged offender. They then succumb to the effects of confirmation bias and look for evidence that supports their view and disregard evidence that does not support it. They then fall prey to what is called noble cause effect, where they think the end, which is convictions, justifies the means. In their mind, this justifies stitching people up. All of this results in situations where unintelligent, uneducated people selectively use inappropriate, altered and made-up evidence in a reductionist and narrow-minded way to try to support their ill and preconceived ideas to stitch people up. A common method the police use to get a lead into stitching people up is to embed themselves into communities until they are accepted and their uniform becomes invisible. The people within these communities see the police frequently and come to like them. Think contact hypothesis. They then invest a level of trust in the police and divulge information which the police use in the ways I've just talked about. This planned method, which is deception, features various characteristics. Number 1. It is socially irresponsible because it is dishonest and deceitful. Number 2. It disregards the rights of others. Number 3. It does not distinguish between right and wrong. Number 4. It shows no empathy. Number 5. It's full of lies. Number 6. It manipulates and hurts others. Number 7. It disregards safety and responsibility. Number 8. Problems with the law. Ultra-virus, exceeding one's powers. In doing this, the police exceed their supposed authority and become a law unto themselves. The only reason they don't get in trouble themselves is because they are the law. They close ranks to protect their buddies instead of protecting the public. That last list you will recognise as traits of psychopathy, also known as antisocial personality disorder. An example of the way the police embed themselves and deceive the public is from a police documentary called Canny Cops. This was based in a place called Hordern in the UK. Hordern is a small, deprived former mining town, and canny in this context means socially acceptable, nice, pleasant, etc. The alliterative title of the documentary and use of the word cop, which does not have negative connotations but is casual, comfortable and friendly, is a common ploy used by the police or their sympathisers to portray a friendly image of them. This can be done consciously or not. The full video of the documentary is no longer available on YouTube, but I've put a link to an excerpt in the video description. I think it was taken down due to being on BBC iPlayer, which requires payment. The behaviour exhibited by the police in the full video and other episodes in the series also shows the disparity between the policing of different demographics and sections of society. In the video, the police operate in Hordern, which is blighted by degeneration, vandalism, unemployment and other social problems. The police who live there are from the lower end, the people who live there are from the lower end of the socio-economic spectrum and to a large extent have been forgotten by society. They do not have the faculties to be aware of their own infiltration by state-funded agents like the police and the subversive tactics they use to stitch them up. Nor do they have the resources to defend themselves in any resultant legal battle, like being accused, investigated and standing trial. When I say resources, I mean the time, money, knowledge, education and gumption to meaningfully defend against it, or the general understanding and awareness that that is taking place. They also don't have social capital to help them, and as they have been forgotten by society, they will not receive help from other agencies to defend themselves sufficiently if they are accused of a crime. Legal aid has been just destroyed. This is not a criticism or belittling of the people there or any particular strata, but an observation. So, after the police behave antisocially to stitch these people up, the police can be seen to be arrogantly celebrating their chosen methods and the plight of the people who are already at the bottom. Their victims are socially and physically immobile, without the means to leave their predicament. The study of the distribution of various psychological characteristics in the population reliably and predictably tell us that some people will behave in certain ways. Sociology tells us that demographics and characteristics correlate together and group together geographically. In other words, the stratification of society. These people who the police stitch up are sitting ducks. They are easy targets. The police go along with, to all intents and purposes, unlimited resources behind them, such as manpower, man-hours, money, vehicles, and knowledge of the system they impose upon people, all provided by the state. This is used against helpless people, which would be completely unfair even if the police were to act in a totally honest way. The fact that they are lying, dishonest psychos compounds their victims' predicaments. A great mind once said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We know that there will always be people at the top and the bottom, and so-called lawbreakers. In reality, laws are made by people. If the police gave a shit, like they often claim to, about the goodness of society and preventing crime, or at least if the people who operate at a much higher level than them in society, who call the shots and call the policy, if they all gave a shit, maybe they would redirect the time and resources that currently go into what is described as maintaining law and order. They should redirect it, and it would be better spent fighting the causes of crime instead of stitching people up. And that way, wrongdoing wouldn't occur and everyone would be better off in so many ways. It would just be so much more efficient. However, that wouldn't satisfy the malevolent nature of the police and the state's wish for control. Compare this, the way the residents of Horden are treated, to a different section of society. The alleged perpetrators of corporate and white-collar crime. In many cases, these kinds of crimes aren't dealt with, and this is for a number of reasons. Although there are specialist police departments dealing with fraud and IP theft, for example, they are small in comparison to the rank-and-file police who police ordinary people in normal residential areas. Many of the alleged corporate or white-collar crimes are abstract, recondite and complex, particularly to the low intelligence of the police. The nature of the alleged wrongdoing in corporate and white-collar crime cannot be easily seen or quickly understood in the same way crimes such as theft of physical goods, damage to property, or injury to a person can be. There are also few witnesses to these kinds of crimes, and it is more difficult for the police to stitch alleged corporate and white-collar crime offenders up because of this. It would also require them being able to understand complex information. It is also much more difficult to understand and manipulate pre-existing paper trails and computer records that exist in many diffuse physical locations and servers which would leave electronic signatures. The would-be intended white-collar and corporate crime victims of the police generally occupy higher socio-economic strata and therefore have many of the resources that the previously mentioned Horden residents do not. This allows them to fight allegations from a stronger footing, and usually more successfully. This makes corporate and white-collar people not such an easy target of the psycho-fascist police. All this makes the police more likely to target the likes of the Horden residents because the police are lazy. Another point to highlight the inadequacy, incompetence and lack of intelligence in police is that of the ubiquitous and nuanced nature of deception. Deception exists everywhere and can occur in many different forms and levels of severity. Obviously, many legal jurisdictions have laws prohibiting this. Some forms of deception are easy to see, such as fraudsters tricking old people out of money by pretending to offer services. Some are a lot more nuanced, like the entire advertising and marketing industry, with the severity being context dependent. Laws can't account for every eventuality, hence things like case law, the application of which requires more complex and abstract thought. In English law, statute laws have definitions and points to prove. Each point needs to be proved to prove guilt. When an alleged crime of deception isn't recognised by the police to match the points to prove / definition of deception, the police cannot conceive of any wrongdoing because they are not capable of this complex thought, or at least more complex thought than their usual retarded nature. The bulk of advertorial and promotional material, for example, is misleading and deceptive in some way, therefore immoral, but might not necessarily meet the criminal threshold. Nothing then will be done about this because the police aren't intelligent enough to realise and don't have the morals to do anything about it, even if they did. The police just stick to their externally imposed morality framework, the criminal law. Although the police could argue that if an alleged wrongdoing of this kind does not meet the criminal threshold, it should not be of their professional concern. This is dishonest. For people who claim to protect the public, keep the peace, and stand up for right and wrong, it is simply lazy and inept to argue this point. Again, I don't want to keep this too long, but I'll add in a few more points about the behaviour of the police. Right. Ego. The police have huge egos. They have very limited knowledge of the laws and associated procedures that it is their job to enforce and apply. Inevitably, they get this wrong and are sometimes challenged by their intended victims. Disbelief and rage results, whether contained or not. Their ego drives them to win at any cost, and it is them who escalate the situation, because not being intelligent or self-aware or emotionally intelligent, they resort to fight or flight mode, thereby escalating any confrontation. They're obviously not going to leave it, they're going to stand and fight. For people who are regularly involved in confrontations, they should really know better and learn, but they just don't. The police, knowing they have the state and its machinery on their side, and that they will be backed to the hilt by their peers and superiors, then lie, cheat, steal, misrepresent, assault, ignore, misconstrue, conspire, collude, pervert, neglect, fabricate, or misconduct themselves in some other way. They want to win at any cost. For all the super naive people out there, it is standard practice for the police to get their heads together and get their stories right, or even to concoct a story. Do not believe the police. Do not trust them. When the police lose a debate, they attempt to enforce their will and bark directives at people. Whatever personal standards or integrity they may have had go out the window. This often involves a physical struggle, which they will win due to them being organised and outnumbering their victims, and their unfair and immoral use of weapons and force, whilst at the same time prohibiting others from using them. A pompous glee is sometimes visible on their faces. It seems to me this glee comes from their lizard brains and the satisfaction of their primitive instinctual drive to overpower others, like a caveman would. Next one, use of weapons and force. As above, the police have a monopoly on weapons and violence and can control who else has weapons by enforcing their laws and issuing firearms licenses. The police's weapons are used immorally and illegally. For example, when someone is detained in handcuffs and not presenting a threat, the police on many occasions have used CS gas to incapacitate them and make them more compliant. This is merely to get them to move into or out of a police vehicle, if they happen to be resisting. This goes against their own procedures, against the idea of the use of justified minimum force, and amounts to assault at the minimum and the administering of a noxious substance. The police also use live offensive weapons in the form of animals. The YouTube channels Crime Bodge and Police Abusing Powers contain many examples of police assaults on the public. Next one, use of animals. There's no such thing as a police dog or a police horse. The police immorally appropriate and train dogs and horses for their own use. This often involves the animals being placed in situations that are not conducive to their well-being and are dangerous. Although the argument that police and others use is that the animals enjoy it, have a good time, receive care and food, etc., the reality is the animals don't know any better. Animals cannot understand what is happening to the same extent people can. They cannot give informed consent to the situations they find themselves in. They are trained and conditioned to behave in certain ways of benefit to the police and do so for reward. You cannot train an animal to be stabbed in the lung and head. It cannot conceptualize this, and even if it could, would surely not consent. Animals exist for their own reasons, not to be enslaved and subjugated by people, and particularly not the police. When terrible things like this happen, like the animals getting injured to so-called police animals, immoral police blame the perpetrators but do not consider that they themselves should take some of the blame for putting the animal in that position in the first place. Many perpetrators of violence against these animals have been prosecuted using criminal damage laws because sufficient laws have not existed to adequately deal with the severity of the wrongdoing against the animal in question. In the UK, there is a campaign to bring in a law to specifically criminalise violence against so-called police animals, Finn's Law. This shows how immoral police think of these animals as property, there to be sacrificed to protect themselves, and their lack of foresight in only now trying to afford them equal protection in law. If the state and its agents cared, this protection would already exist, or even better, the animals would not be used for these purposes. There are also many examples of police brutality against the animals they use, and they are only too happy to execute escaped animals intended for consumption, such as cows out of a field or dogs accused of defending themselves against violent and abusive people. Next one, photography. I alluded to this one earlier. Despite the modern ubiquitous nature of cameras, the police don't like them. Well, they don't like the ones that they cannot control or edit the footage from, just in case they have been caught on camera behaving in their usual egregious way. Many of the disgusting methods of behaviour I've just discussed are used by the police against innocent people like tourists and auditors who use cameras to try to stop them filming or taking pictures. They do this because they do not want their immoral and criminal behaviour caught on camera as evidence. The police cite many reasons like the security of their buildings, personal vehicles and number plates. This is to try to justify their dislike of cameras and their desire or intention to make people stop filming. However, this is all intellectually dishonest. Photography is not a crime. If the police don't want their police station filmed, they should put a fence around it. If they do not want their personal cars or number plates filmed, don't come out in public view. The very purpose of a number plate is to make the vehicle to which it is attached uniquely identifiable. Therefore, it needs to be visible to all. The police love to film the public, often secretively, but do not like the lens pointed at them. Hypocrites. When the police approach auditors, if they don't do it aggressively, they insinuate that the auditor must be mentally unwell or sad for doing what they're doing by saying things like, "Are you okay?" or "Have you not got anything else better to do?" I would ask, have the police not got anything better to do? other than to walk around wearing a stupid costume, selling their soul for a few pence in betrayal of the public. When the police challenge an auditor who is engaged in a perfectly legal act and the auditor successfully rebuts them, the police resort to pathetic, childlike insults. Next one. Taking advantage of, ridiculing and neglecting vulnerable people. There is a tidal wave of cases of police across this place, known as the UK, sexually abusing children, being in possession of child pornography, arranging to meet children for sex, and other sex and child sex crimes. There is also an abundance of police abusing their position by obtaining contact details of female victims of crime and initiating or attempting to initiate sexual contact with them. There's also numerous cases of police failing to protect people known to be at risk from violent and or sexual offenders. A recent example is the death by stabbing of a woman in London, killed by her former partner who was the subject of a restraining order. The police even had the nerve to arrest a brave person who tried to defend the killed woman. Shocking. Next one, driving. In emergency situations such as pursuits or responding to incidents, there are 4 specific road traffic law exemptions granted to blue light vehicle drivers in the UK. These are exemption from speed limits, keep left arrows, keep right arrows, and red traffic lights, which should be treated as a giveaway. The reality is the police play fast and loose when driving. I have noticed a constant stream of road traffic collisions in local and national media involving police cars whilst on blue light journeys, mainly pursuits. Due to the nature of driving, these often result in very serious injuries and or death of innocent bystanders or other road users and passengers. This is immoral and unacceptable. The police and their sympathisers will claim that they are professional drivers with years of experience and training. However, they readily embark on pursuits in high-powered vehicles travelling at high speeds in urban areas. This cannot be justified, especially for the sake of a shitty old stolen car. When a car evades capture, the police readily state that the occupants will be caught in the future, thereby negating the need for a dangerous pursuit that they have just taken part in. Despite their training, risk assessment and approval by a remote supervisor, usually an inspector in the control room, a police chase still presents extreme danger as the ego-driven police provoke and encourage the chased vehicle to be driven ever more recklessly, without training, skill, consideration and quite often sobriety. The actions of the police suggest that they don't care in the same way that the chased driver doesn't care about the squashed bystander. They just want to get away. In the UK, it is now illegal to use a handheld mobile phone in any way when driving, except for emergencies, obviously. I'm not sure of the exact wording of the law, but if you watch any police driving or police documentaries, you will regularly see them using their handheld chest-mounted radios or vehicle-mounted radios when driving normally or in blue light and pursuit conditions. Some of the radios they use are airwave and similar. These radios have the ability to be used in a similar way to mobile phones. Regardless of what the law says though, it is thoroughly irresponsible, unsafe and immoral for the police to be doing this. Unsafe, that one's obvious. Immoral, they stitch people up for doing the same thing. And it is immoral because it's dangerous. These actions amount to systematic and foreseeable law breaking and unacceptable behaviour on the part of the police. Yet, systems in police cars have not been implemented to reduce this risk. One method could be to have an open line to the control room in a pursuit situation. This would be easy and relatively cheap to implement and would negate the dangerous driving conditions, or at least reduce them, that the police regularly take part in. Just one point there, when I said about the exemption for emergencies, obviously that doesn't apply to the police because that is their bread and butter, that is their job. They expect to be in emergency situations, and it's obviously not acceptable for them to use these devices that takes their attention away from the road. The usual response from people who are emotionally invested in the police when faced with criticism of the police is to say things like, "Oh, I bet you'd ring them if you needed them," and the usual unconsidered, regurgitated rubbish about how they do a good job protecting us. A few of the acts the police do could be considered as good, but that isn't mutually inclusive with the idea of them being police. You don't need to be police to do a good act. A lot of the publicity involving police is carefully contrived to create favourable impressions of them in the minds of suggestible people. I mean, just open your mind and observe all the time. Police programmes, adverts, the media in general, next door neighbours, society. Examples include how they have rescued a person or an animal from a dangerous situation, whether involving crime or not. They don't need to be police to do this. They just got the call and in many cases didn't expend much effort in the act anyway. A lot of these acts are overplayed in the media, as opposed to police wrongdoing, which is downplayed, even if it is reported, which of course it often isn't. If I witnessed an immoral and illegal act taking place, I wouldn't ring the police for all the reasons mentioned. It's about as much use as shooting yourself in the face. The call handler belittles what you say and tries to deprioritise your call. If the police do turn up days later, they tell you everything they can't do, usually chewing and looking like an absolute bag of shit. They tell you they'll be back in touch and never call again. There is a saying that the best way to catch someone is red-handed. The police must have never heard this. I just need to add a disclaimer here. I have actually reported people and provided evidence to the police remotely for the sake of the greater good. Obviously, it wasn't because I revere the police like a lot of people. The way I see it is that I was setting two bad parties against each other. There's obviously scummy criminal bastards in the world that need dealing with. It seems to me, though, that what the police have become is not what was envisaged. I don't have a problem with the administration of justice when done properly and fairly against bastards. The only problem right now is the people whose job it is to do it. The very fact that we have the state, laws and policing agencies is a testament to people's desire to be free and others to control them, and an acknowledgement in some cases of the shortfall in human nature to live by the golden rule of do as you will be done by. There are bad people in this world. Some of them wish to seek cover whilst engaging in their wickedness. They are the ones who protest too much, with plausible deniability. They join an organisation who on the face of it have respectability, but in reality are the embodiment of evil. With regards to what I mentioned earlier about police not being able to understand that any force used against them could be morally justified, it's because they're stupid, self-centred, egotistical idiots. As I said, legality does not map onto morality and vice versa. Their rules are designed to control us and aren't in our interests. I used to think that my morality was well developed and superseded the criminal law, and that the reason I didn't commit certain acts that people call crimes was because they are morally wrong. This includes acts such as violence and destruction. However, after Herculean efforts in introspection and philosophising about these issues, I've now come to the understanding that that was wrong. I still try not to cause harm, loss or injury, but this is subject to a complex decision-making process like everything. It's easy to envisage situations or contexts when these actions would be morally justifiable, like self-defence beyond what the law allows or punishment of child abusers. In that sense, though, the criminal law works very well, because it is the only thing, or at least the personal consequences to myself are the only thing, that stop me committing rightful acts against tyrants and oppressors and anybody else who wrongs me or others. Anyone who attempts to take away freedom doesn't deserve the most basic of freedoms themselves. Little disclaimer and note to stupid people, intellectually dishonest people, and people who try to stitch others up. This is not meant to incite violence. On the contrary, it is an acknowledgement of the effectiveness of criminal law, which is its aim. So, we're all getting sick of the police. I'm getting sick of the police. To sum up, I would just say that the police are psycho-fascist thugs who enjoy dominating people. Their primitive makeup affords them pleasure in doing this. They're unintelligent, so the hierarchical structure of the police appeals to them and facilitates their desire to punish people. There is no qualitative difference between them and common thugs. I will also place a link to a video by the YouTuber Social Experimentalist. No explanation is needed, but it shows how the police will enforce any law for money and how they can't think for themselves, which is obviously a dangerous combination. Watch it because it's an eye-opener. And then, just to finally finish off, you might be wondering how this appraisal of the police is informed. To add provenance, and further to my prior stated experience of the police, I too have been one. I've worked for and with many police and policing organisations around the world and in an advisory role. You might be thinking, how can you say such things? That I must be the same as them, or disgruntled for some reason. No, well, I mean, I am disgruntled because I think they're all bastards. I'm just not emotionally invested in the police like a lot of people are. I like to see and say things the way they are, and the way I've said it is the way it is. I've had first-hand inside experience at how that sort of person operates, and I couldn't wait to get away, because I have integrity, standards, and I'm not a fascist or a psycho, and nor do I wish to dominate people. I'm an anomaly, one of the few people who join and don't fit in, and realise what a big mistake it was. There is an earthquake of accountability and rigorous improvement of standards coming to the police, and they're not going to like it. The ever-increasing exposure of the police's behaviour towards those who they claim to serve act as the pressure that will result in the earthquake that will fucking break the Richter scale. Sometimes the bitten bite back. So, who are the police? That's who the fucking are. Stay away, stay safe, and stay moral. Don't trust them. And in the words of the NWA, fuck the police.